Ndibani Ndewonu. I'm absolutely delighted to be part of this year's virtual IgboConference and would like to thank Yvonne Mbanefo and the conference organizers for inviting me to share my reflections on storytelling, observations on our literary legacy, and linking this back to an initiative I've been working on for the past 6 years. As an Igbo woman, proud of her dual heritage, I've attended many Igbo conferences in the past and have found them to be a great source of inspiration, deepening my knowledge and understanding of the Igbo culture. It's a privilege to be here, albeit virtually. So why storytelling? Because storytelling is as old as mankind. Stories shape us, they define us, they teach us about life, our lives, and the life of other people. They are an important way to pass down our experiences, cultures, and values to the next generation and to allow us to construct our own narrative. We are constantly evolving the way we communicate and share our stories, be it through spoken word, through oral or written literature, digital, print, through film, arts, music, and even dance. The mechanism with which we pass this on is contextual. If COVID has taught us anything, it is the need to innovate and to remain connected. What is important is that the wheels keep turning, that we keep telling our stories in a myriad of ways to reach as wide an audience as possible. Now, the cheap and cheerful way I grew up consuming my stories was through books. Growing up in Enugu and spending my formative years at a boarding school in the East, I still have fond memories of getting my first library card from Enugu State Library. Visiting the bookshop next to Kingsway or Presidential Hotel with my mother was a special treat. Buying books while stuck in a traffic jam was an experience. And if you're brave enough to take your new books back to school, well, who can forget the informal rota system we would devise as to who gets to read what next? My summer holidays were spent in Denmark and Germany, and I enjoyed many countless hours exploring my grandparents' libraries of leather-bound books. It was blissful solitude. Probably came as no surprise to my family that in my early 30s, I would leave my job in the City of London to carve out a path in the publishing space. But as I navigate my way through the multiple realities and places I call home at various points in my life, city life in Enugu, village life in Olo, Copenhagen, Bremen, London, Paris, and now Surrey, I noticed things that would eventually start to bother me. The truth was, outside one's middle-class bubble in Nigeria, books were still considered a luxury item, expensive and unaffordable to the vast majority of people whose income hovered around the breadline. The public libraries that I visited were sparsely stocked and more likely to be used for prayer meetings, one librarian lamented to me. I hated walking to a bookshop to find it full of foreign imported literature with only a small section at the back dedicated to African fiction. And it was easier to find books in Europe, titles by African writers, even if the bookseller would typically draw a blank if you mentioned any other name other than Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Things have changed a lot now. But don't get me started on the educational conferences that lamented on the lack of access to quality, affordable, and culturally relevant literature to use in schools. Surely, I would ask myself, there are many more Achebes, Adiches, and Shoinkas published on the continent that might not have the same marketing budget to make a big splash when published by an international publisher, but they were just as good. Could the problem be looking for a needle in a haystack? And so began my quest to discover Africa stories, to curate a collection of titles across Africa and its diaspora, books written and published by us, for us, and about us. In short, unapologetically Pan-African. In 2014, I launched Digital Back Books, a virtual library platform on which the Discover Africa Stories collection would sit, and developed a business model that would facilitate partnerships with libraries, with schools, books club, interested in making some of these titles accessible to a much broader audience. I do still feel like being in a virtual sweet shop whenever I browse what we've curated so far, as we have a wonderful selection of books from Nigeria, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Cameroon, Kenya, Namibia, and many more. Whilst there's still a long way to go, I'm delighted with the publishing and institutional partnerships we have forged. If you're interested, do please get in touch. After all, we cannot speak about decolonizing our spaces while still consuming a predominantly Eurocentric narrative in schools. And this leads me on to my next point, our literary legacy. Now, we cannot deny that in recent years, there has been an explosion of English literature on the international stage by writers of African origin, and a flurry of interest in not just publishing, but also adapting these stories to screen. African literature is trending, someone told me recently. But alongside these new and emerging voices, it is still important, at least for me, to be able to read the classic stories by those first generation African writers, many, but not all, who we have come to know and love through their orange AWS covers. Stories that chronicled our lives, our struggles, pain and frustration, but are sadly falling out of print because they're not commercially viable anymore. Whilst reading Half of the Yellow Sun by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, whose love story has a backdrop of the Biafra War, I also want to read Sunset in Biafra by Lechi Amadi, Survive the Peace by Cyprian Okwensi, or Never Again by Flora Nwapa, all of these writers who have experienced the war firsthand. And I'm deeply disturbed and vexed that when I get to handing my son books written by Barack Obama, America's first African-American president, I would have to pay hundreds of pounds to get a copy of My Odyssey by Nigerian's first president, Nnamdi Azikiwe. Or that when my son will show an interest in reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, a series of personal writings by a Roman emperor, it has been near impossible to get my hands on Meditations by Nnamdi Azikiwe, a collection of poetry written from the 1920s to the 1960s, and probably one of my most prized possessions that I discovered in Onitsha Market. And as we move, migrate, fuse our culture with others, and resettle in lands like Europe, China, Russia, there are many more stories that might help future generations navigate their own, stories waiting to be translated or rediscovered by a global English-speaking audience. So what to do with all my frustrations? And they really are. In 2020, I decided to expand the Discover Africa Stories concept into a publishing imprint that would sit alongside our curated digital platform and allow me to acquire rights that might not be available digitally. We have plans to acquire and republish some of these important classic and contemporary titles in translation, where possible in print, but mainly in hardback under our very own Discover Africa Stories editions. I'm delighted to share that our very first title will be published later on this year. You will hear more about The German Crocodile by Ijoma Mangold in the next segment. A hugely successful bestseller in Germany, Ijoma is one of the country's leading literary critics, and in his compelling memoir, he explores many existential questions within the context of his dual heritage. The English edition is being translated by Ruth Kemp, and we're grateful to have her work supported by grants from the Goethe Institute and the English Pen. On our roadmap to republish as well, this time next year, is Never Again, included in a short story collection by Florent Watwa. Florent Watwa needs no introduction to this audience. As one of the forerunners of a generation of Nigerian women, best known for recreating Igbo life and customs from a woman's perspective in titles such as Ifuru, Idu, and Late Goddess. We do have plans to grow the list, so please get in touch if you or your estate is sitting on publishing rights that have reverted back. Now, to close, I want to loop my thoughts back to the theme of this year's conference: how we consider the possibility for rebirth following a period of immense disruption and transformation. For me, this is accepting, considering, imagining that our children and our children's children, at least here in the diaspora, will be constructing their own sense of identity, one that is rooted very much in their present reality, and perhaps not so much in their parents' past. At best, I can urge them to claim their birthright as African Europeans. And through storytelling, in whatever form that may be, however they want to consume it, impact a sense of pride in their rich cultural heritage, of which I'm sure that the IgboConference will be a huge part of, but ultimately allowing them to tell their own stories. Lots to mull over, lots to discuss, and I hope to be able to do so at next year's IgboConference in person. Thank you.